And I point to, one, I don't want to overuse metaphors, but one metaphor is you have a very beautiful, expensive vase, and somebody knocks it over and it breaks into 5,000 pieces. You can't put the vase back together. You've got to go get a new one. And that's what's happened with the supply chain. What I call supply chain 1.0 from 1989 to 2019 is broken. There will be a new supply chain. There always are. Supply chains have been around since the Bronze Age, if not earlier. But the new supply chain, what I call supply chain 2.0, will look very different than the old supply chain. Right now, we're in an in-between period where things don't work well. Again, it doesn't mean total chaos, but you still see shortages, you still see higher prices, which are coming from supply chain disruptions. And these things are not easy to fix, but they can be replaced, and that's what I expect to happen. We are at peak inflation. Inflation is going away very quickly, and the Fed moves are working now. It doesn't mean that the Fed won't blunder and make this worse. I think they will. We can come back to that. But okay, so the inflation sort of came on the scene in mid-2021, in the summer 2021. By the fall, it was very high, and this is when Jay Powell was saying transitory, transitory, transitory. By November 2021, he threw in the towel. He said, okay, time to retire the word transitory. And then they started hiking rates in March. On March 1st, the policy rate, the Fed funds target rate, was 0. Today it's 4.25%. It's going to go up another 50 basis points on December 14th. So, and then the next meeting after that is February 1st. So they're going to keep raising over 5, probably get to 5.25%. That's in less than a year. I mean, we've gone to 4.25 in less than 8 months, or just barely 8 months. So, but inflation is already off the top. It's going to come down a lot more. The markets are not ready for that. I see the inflation. I put gas in my car. I go to the grocery store. I see it just like everybody else. Home heating costs, and eggs, milk, bacon, food, gasoline, etc. But here's the point, Danielle. There are two major sources of inflation potentially. One is the supply side. So supply shortages, supply chain disruptions, the kind of things we've been talking about. That's called cost push inflation. Costs go up and it gets pushed onto the consumer. The other source is demand, what's called demand pull inflation, which is more psychological. Consumers are thinking about choices and they say, I was thinking about buying a refrigerator. I was going to wait 6 months, but hey, the price is going up. I better go buy it now before the price goes up. In the 1970s, we had both. We started with cost push from the Arab oil embargo, but it flipped into demand pull in the late 70s and it just spun out of control, and Paul Volcker had to crush it. Today, the inflation is coming from the supply side. Some of the things we talked about, higher fuel costs. I mean, everything has to be transported, so fuel is part of everything. It gets built into the price of everything, and there are other shortages and bottlenecks and costs that have to be taken up by manufacturers and distributors. So that's real. I'm not saying the inflation isn't real, but it hasn't leached over onto the demand side. The psychology of consumers is not, gee, I better buy it today because the price is going to go up. It's like, no, I better save money today or watch my budget, etc. And here's the difference. Demand pull inflation feeds on itself. The more of it you get, the more of it you get. It does spin out of control. So the cost push inflation from the supply side tends to be self-negating. There's an old saying, the cure for high oil prices is high oil prices. If your SUV or Ford F-150 pickup truck, if you're filling up the tank, went from $75 to $150, which it has, that demand is inelastic. You got to put gas in your car. You got to get to work, take the kids to school, whatever it may be. But that means $75 in my example that you're not going to spend on dinner or a concert ticket or a vacation or a new dress or a new suit of clothes or whatever it may be. So that tends to, and so here's the Fed trying to deal with inflation, but they're dealing with it from the supply side. The Fed doesn't drill for oil. They don't drive trucks. They don't grow crops. They don't have farms, etc. The Fed can't do anything about supply side inflation except destroy demand. But here's the question: how much demand do you have to destroy to control inflation coming from the supply side? The answer is a lot. They're trying to get to a terminal rate. They're already there. They just don't know it. They'll be the last to know. So they're going to take rates to 5.25 or higher by March, but they're already at the terminal rate. They just don't know it. And so inflation is already coming down. And this is the thing that the markets and investors are not ready for. Inflation is going to come down fast. There's even some danger of deflation and a major U.S. recession in 2023. and no one's ready for that. I mean, people talk about recession, but it's going to be worse than they think.
I want to bring up this article from Bloomberg. There's a hidden risk to the global financial system embedded in the $65 trillion of dollar debt being held by non-U.S. institutions via currency derivatives. This is according to the Bank for International Settlements. The article goes on to say a lack of information is making it harder for policymakers to anticipate the next financial crisis.
Well, first of all, that article is exactly right. We've been talking about recession, inflation, deflation, but the one thing we haven't spoken about yet, you kind of just referred to it, is there a global liquidity crisis coming? And a liquidity financial crisis is different from a recession. Sometimes you can have one without the other. In 1990 we had a recession, there was no crisis. 1998 we had a crisis, there was no recession. The economy was fine in 1998, but the financial world almost came to an end. Sometimes they come together, and that's what happened in 2008. We may be looking at a scenario like that. By the way, 65 trillion in foreign currency derivatives, yeah, but try 1 quadrillion in total derivatives. I mean, that's foreign currency, and that was the focus of the BIS paper. But when you get into interest rate swaps and commodity swaps and swaptions and all the rest, that's 1 quadrillion, which for people not familiar with the Q word is 1,000 trillion. So you pointed to 65 trillion, and you're right, that's FX, but there's 1,000 trillion or 1 quadrillion of derivatives off balance sheet of the banking system, supported by collateral, a little sliver of collateral, and there's a dollar shortage, and that's getting ready to implode.
I want to just bring up crypto here, since we've spoken about it in the past. Obviously, a horrific year for the sector. Do you think that Bitcoin will still be around, Jim?
Eventually, no. It'll be around for a while, and it might, outperform some of the other cryptos. But I'm struck by the fact that I go back to the Gertrude-Stein theory. There's no there. And what's interesting about the last 5 years, and by the way, I say things like this, Danielle, and people go, "Oh, Jim Rickards, he's a dinosaur. He doesn't understand technology." It's nonsense. I read, Satoshi Nakamoto's paper. Within months of its coming out, I've been in, gold, Bitcoin debates since 2010. I actually know a lot about it, which kind of brings me to my point, which is with nothing in the center, they replicated the entire structure of Wall Street. So you have exchanges, custodians, futures, options, settlement, clearance, lending, yields, etc. This whole Wall Street infrastructure, financial infrastructure, around nothing. I mean, Tesla stock, for example, maybe you like Tesla, maybe you don't. That's an individual choice. But at least they make cars. There's a real car there. And even intangibles, insurance companies provide services. There's something there. In crypto, there's nothing there. But they've replicated this infrastructure. And so a lot of the wealth that's been generated in crypto is because you own a crypto exchange, or you own a lender set. Now that's all imploding. It's kind of a replay of 2008, except instead of Bear Stearns